There are the imperfects of the hollows, all right? How would you make these imperatives? Take off the prefix, all right? So we simply end up with cum. Now that's the root. You should be able to figure this one out, all right? But do you see how you got that? We didn't get it by just taking the root. We took it by taking the imperfect, ta cum, and losing the prefix. Cum, kumi, kumu, komna. Right. Hey, by the way, remember in the Gospels when Jesus raises the little girl and he says to her, Talitha, what does he say? This is Aramaic, but it's the same form. He doesn't say, well, cum is, it depends which Gospel you read. He says, Talitha kumi. Kumi. What form is he using? The second singular feminine imperative, because he's telling her to get up. Talitha kumi. Get up. Okay? So hollows aren't a problem. Okay? With me? You may not believe me. That's all right. But let's look at first nuns. Okay? What happens to our first nun problem? Now, what shall we pick for a first nun? Let's use na sa, since it came to mind. What's the imperfect of na sa? All right, if we just start with the third singular masculine, which is the first form, what happens? Well, by the book, we're supposed to do this, right? Yin, yin. But what happens now with first nuns? This is something you can almost predict when you have a nun and a silent schwa. Here's a little review. What's going to happen? That nun assimilates, or it turns into the next letter, and gets replaced in the next letter by a dagesh forte. The bottom line is that the nun becomes a dagesh forte. So that the form that you actually see is yissa. Now this has also got an A vowel here simply because this is a guttural. That's a minor problem, and let's not even worry about that. The problem, of course, is the disappearing nun. This is review, correct? Correct. Now, when we go to the second singular masculine, conjugate yissa. Yissa, third feminine, would be, I'm doing the yik, tick, tick, tick stuff. All right, yissa, tissa. The second singular form will be also tissa, right? The second singular feminine will be tissai, right? And then we'd have essa in the first. Over here we'd have yissa'u, yisana, and then in the second persons we'd have tissa'u, right? Then we'd have, am I right? Then we'd have Tisana with our na ending. All right. Those are the imperfect forms. If those are the imperfect forms, what are the imperative forms? Well, what are we doing here? Taking off the prefix, right? Now, here's the problem. When we take off the prefix, we're left with just this word sa, starting with two S's. See? You can't start a word with a double consonant, so guess what happens to our dagesh forte? You can't start a word with a double consonant, so that this form simply becomes sa. And the next form, feminine, becomes sa'i. And the plural becomes sa'u. And, oops, the feminine plural becomes sana. Okay, messed that one up. The problem, of course, is that when you see a word like sa, what do you notice? Well, the problem is you don't really notice anything here, right? There's no prefix, there's no suffix, there's only two root letters, and there's no clue for the missing third root letter, right? You got nothing. You got nothing. And that's why these are a problem. right? Now, the fact is that this is the only form we've seen, and probably the only form we're going to see where you truly have nothing. Is perhaps some help if you remember that that form that has nothing is probably the imperative form. But now you're still stuck with saying, well, I got to figure out at least a root, all right? Theoretically, there could be a prefix here which would give me something. And if the prefix would give me something and tell me it's imperfect, and I've got an imperfect without the prefix, which is why I got nothing, then the something should be a clue that this was an imperfect that became an imperative, which is what I've got. Did that make any sense? Something about nothing.
Quite a trip.
Yeah.
Pack a lunch to get there.
So, but even if you figure out that this is probably an imperative form, you still don't know what root it is. Where's your clue that this is a missing first nun? Answer?
No clue.
There ain't one. Okay, there's no clue here. Now, before you panic and start running through the entire vocabulary list, looking for any root that has these two letters in it, remember this. What letters disappear? Right? I mean, we're working with a closed set here, okay? If you're going to just start guessing at random, at least try a first nun, a first yod, or maybe even a third hey. All right? So you're not without some good guesses, even if you're going to employ trial and error. This could be from a root nasa. Theoretically, I suppose it could be from a root yasa. Well, you don't get too far before you go, wait a minute, nasa, yasa, I do know this root. Or if you're still stuck, now you do start looking them up, but you might look up the wrong one, but you're not going to look up too many wrong ones till you stumble into the right one. So help thyself. Okay, that's first nun. Let's do first yod. What happens with first yod roots? What do we use? Yashav. Here's a first yod root. Yashav, right? What's the imperfect? Technically, we added the imperfect prefix to these, remember? And you should get something like ye, but in fact, you lose the first root letter. This is review of the first yod imperfects. Now you've got this vowel in an open syllable. Instead of being yik, which is what you'd have in the regular verb, yik, you've got ye, and it's an open syllable, so the short vowel lengthens and the heric lengthens to sere, and you get yay. So that the imperfect form is yay.